Hi, everybody. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about Spike Protein Detox Part 2. In Part 1, I talked about how we can get rid of some of the spike proteins that are circulating free in the bloodstream. When spike proteins are not bound to cell receptors or they're not inside of cells, then proteolytic enzymes like nattokinase and bromelain and serrapeptase can be beneficial because they can either break down the spike protein or they can break down clots that form because of the spike proteins. But most of the spike proteins are actually found inside of cells or on receptors on the cell membrane. So how we deal with those is completely different because the proteolytic enzymes only function in the bloodstream and they can't get inside of our cells. So in this talk, we will look at how we can deal with intracellular spike proteins. And then remember that this information is for educational purposes only, and I am not diagnosing or giving medical advice or telling anyone to take any supplements. So I'm just talking about how things work. When we look at where the spike proteins are found in our body, like I said before, some are going to be free in the blood plasma, in the circulatory system, and we can maybe deal with a lot of those with the proteolytic enzymes. But most of the spike proteins are going to be on or in our cells. Sometimes they can be in the cytoplasm, sometimes bound to receptors, and sometimes they can be incorporated into exosomes, which are like small membrane-bound little kind of fat balls where the spike protein can be inside and then they can be released from the cells. And this is a dynamic process. The spike proteins are never really in one place for a long period of time. They're sort of being created and moved around to different parts of the cell, binding to different things, causing problems. Because it is a foreign protein, it is going to make our immune system react. And this is why we have so much inflammation, why so many vaccine injury symptoms involve inflammatory responses. In the last talk, we looked at how we can use different enzymes in the bloodstream. In this talk, I am going to be focusing specifically on how we can detox substances, not just spike protein, but all kinds of harmful things, misfolded proteins, foreign proteins, viruses, and we can even deal with cells that are damaged, and we can deal with cancer cells and old cells that are senescent and don't do their job very well anymore. And when we look at this column here, the autophagy lysosomes, the ubiquitin proteasome system, apoptosis, and then also how we can deal with the oxidative stress that comes along with a lot of inflammation, and then how we can help our DNA repair. Because the vaccines are created so that the messenger RNA is inside of a lipid nanoparticle, that allows these lipid nanoparticles to bring the messenger RNA, that is modified RNA. It's not the same as the normal RNA made in our cells. And it can bring this messenger RNA to all the cells in our body. So the biodistribution, because it's a fat membrane, it can literally go into any cells. And this also accounts for why different people have different symptoms, because different amounts of lipid nanoparticles may have gone to different tissues in higher quantities. So people that have myocarditis, more of the lipid nanoparticles probably went to the heart. People with neurological symptoms, more of these lipid nanoparticles likely got into the brain and the peripheral nerves. So different people are going to have different symptoms based on the biodistribution. The other part of the vaccine that is an issue is that there was DNA contamination. So this means there were plasmid DNA molecules, circular pieces of DNA that contain the spike protein gene, as well as promoter sequences that tell the cell when to express that gene. So the DNA contamination, it seems that in some people, this DNA may be integrating into the cell's actual normal genome. And therefore, the ongoing high levels of spike protein in people that are vaccine injured is likely due to the cells expressing spike proteins for long periods of time. So how do we deal with all of these spike proteins that are inside of our cells? When we look at all the different kinds of things that can cause damage to our cells, it's not just spike proteins, but any kind of a foreign protein is going to stimulate the immune system to create an inflammatory response. The immune system itself, when it's making inflammatory cytokines, those cytokines are causing damage to healthy cells as well. And during this process, we have oxidative stress, which is reactive oxygen species, so ROSs. Other toxins, other vaccine components, plus other toxins in our environment can also damage our cells. So pesticides and herbicides and forever chemicals and heavy metals and all of those things. Anytime we have inflammatory reactions, like I said, our normal healthy cells are going to be damaged. When our tissues are damaged, either from toxins, infections, or the inflammatory response itself, the tissue damage is going to affect what cells are going to be functioning normally or not. Infections can cause issues. If we have nutrient deficiencies, then the cells are going to have less ability to be able to deal with these infections and toxins and cellular damage, and less able to detoxify our body and to regenerate our cells. So we need to make sure we're not deficient in like B vitamins, for example, that allow our cells to be able to make energy. We need minerals like magnesium, zinc, copper, calcium, all of those kinds of minerals that help our cells function normally. Also things like radiation, and that includes electromagnetic fields. These frequencies can be very damaging to our cells. And then aging, which generally just means we have an accumulation of all of the factors that I just talked about. When we are looking at how we clean up inside of our cells, we have a sort of series of different pathways that can help our cells get rid of stuff, or we can get rid of the damaged cells completely. So autophagy is when we can remove damaged organelles inside of our cells. So for example, mitochondria is an organelle inside of our cells that make energy. We have lots of different kinds of organelles that have various functions. So the lysosomes, they're little membrane-bound organelles that contain digestive enzymes. And then we have organelles called proteasomes. And these are like our protein quality control organelles, and they help to get rid of damaged proteins specifically. And then we have a process called apoptosis, and this is when we can completely kill through programmed cell death, cells that are no longer functioning or they're too mutated to function properly and can potentially become cancer cells. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of my favorite pathways, the NRF2 pathway and sirtuins. And these are really important for getting rid of oxidative stress and healing our DNA, repairing our DNA. When we have DNA damage, then proteins are going to be produced that are not normal proteins. So the DNA is the template or the instructions for making messenger RNA in our body normally. And then that messenger RNA codes for proteins. And we have about 100,000 different proteins in our cells that have all various functions. Here is a typical cell. So just to point out a few different things. So this big purple blob here is our nucleus, and the nucleus is where we have our DNA. So the DNA is called, when it's all unfolded, we call it chromatin, but it's the same thing. So inside of this nucleus is where the DNA is transcribed into messenger RNA. The messenger RNA then either goes to this big blue tubey endoplasmic reticulum structure, or it can go to a free ribosome. These little red dots are ribosomes, and this is where we produce proteins. Those proteins can then go to this thing called the Golgi apparatus to be modified or altered in some way so that it's functional. Sometimes proteins will leave the cell and go into the bloodstream, like when your pancreas makes insulin hormones, that will leave the cell and go into the blood and have an effect on other cells. The mitochondria here, these are the organelles that make ATP or our energy. Lysosomes, these are the digestive system of the cell that have enzymes that will break down old organelles. We have these proteasome structures that I'll talk about. We can ubiquitinate things, and then these proteasomes will basically chop them up and digest them. So the first process we're going to look at is called autophagy, and this means basically self-eating. This is a process where we can get rid of all kinds of things like damaged organelles, foreign proteins, toxic proteins, misfolded proteins, aggregated proteins, organelles, and viruses. So the two main pathways, I'll simplify this. I don't want you to think of this as very complex. There's all kinds of things that are going on, but we'll just focus on a couple of main things. So mTOR and AMPK, these are the two signaling molecules that will either turn on autophagy, which is AMPK, or turn off autophagy, which is mTOR. So these molecules are signaling molecules, and we need to have a balance. We want to sometimes have mTOR because mTOR tells our cells to build and grow. We need mTOR to build muscles. We produce mTOR whenever we make insulin or whenever we eat proteins. So when we eat carbohydrates, we make more insulin, which means we will be stimulating mTOR. So insulin is a storage molecule. It tells our cells to take up the nutrients we've just eaten and use them as building blocks or store extra for energy to use later. When we have periods of time when we're not eating, then we're not going to make mTOR and we will make AMPK. AMPK, adenosine monophosphate kinase, this is a molecule that stimulates the autophagy process. So the primary way that we turn on the autophagy cleaning process, think of this as like cleaning your house. If you have, a house, you have dirty dishes, you have to sweep the floor, you have dust, you have laundry, you have cupboards and attics and basements with all kinds of stuff, right? So when we want to clean and get rid of things, take out the garbage, we need to stimulate AMPK. So the primary way we're going to do that is by having periods of time when we're not eating. When we make AMPK, this is going to stimulate all kinds of processes, and we're going to start to form this membrane, which will engulf all of the things that we want to get rid of. Once we produce this complete membrane, it's called an autophagosome. And these molecules can be chopped up once they combine with a lysosome, and they can be exported out of the cell, which means they would go into the bloodstream, and then your liver would take those up, break them down further, detoxify things, recycle nutrients. Or those waste products can go to the kidneys through the circulatory system, and the kidneys will excrete them. The other pathway is that those molecules can be broken up and then just reused inside of the cell. So when we break up proteins, we make amino acids. When we break up organelles, we're going to have all kinds of molecules that we can recycle and use again. So the process of autophagy is about cleaning up our cells and getting rid of toxins, misfolded proteins, damaged organelles, any kind of pathogens that might be inside of our cells. And then when we break these down, we can recycle a lot or we can excrete them. And When we are in this process, when we've stimulated AMPK and we're going through this cleaning autophagy process, then we are going to actually also decrease inflammation, which is really important when people with vaccine injuries are dealing with a lot of inflammatory reactions. And then we are going to stimulate the production of new organelles. So biogenesis means that we're going to make new organelles. So for example, if we break down old mitochondria, then biogenesis means that we'll make new mitochondria. These are the organelles very important for making energy. And every cell in the whole body needs energy. You might notice if your energy level is low because your muscles feel fatigued, or you have brain fog, or your memory is bad, or cognitive function is decreasing, or mood swings, or things like that. Those are the sort of early indicators of having low energy. And it shows that you need to have more active mitochondria. There's lots of ways that we can stimulate that process of increasing the amount of healthy organelles that we have. So when we're looking at stimulating autophagy, the number one thing that we're going to do to make AMPK is fasting. We need to eat sometimes and we need to not eat sometimes. We need both. We need to take in nutrients and use them, build and grow, and then we need to not eat and have this cleaning process going on. The other things that can stimulate autophagy include exercise, right? When we exercise, we're going to burn nutrients, or we're going to use the nutrients in our bloodstream and our muscles and our fat cells. We're going to use those for energy. So if you combine a little bit of fasting and a little bit of exercise, you're going to get extra kind of stimulation of the AMPK. Cold and heat exposure can also stimulate this, mostly because whenever we have some kind of a stress on our body, like cold or heat, low nutrients, exercise, those things stimulate that AMPK molecule. And so we want to have that sometimes. But again, every kind of stressor, like exercise, has to be within a healthy range, right? We don't want to go run a marathon if we haven't been training, right? That's going to be extremely stressful. Or you don't want to be, in cold exposure, do a cold plunge for an hour, because that's going to be too stressful. So it has to be kind of the right amount of stress that is going to have beneficial effects without causing hormones like cortisol to be secreted in high amounts. When we have too much stress and too much cortisol, cortisol is a kind of damaging hormone where it's going to break things down. You're going to break down stored energy, but then you're also going to break down muscle mass and increase inflammation. So it's important to have a balance. Some supplements that can help stimulate AMPK: spermidine, berberine, quercetin, resveratrol, melatonin, and hydrogen water. Hydrogen water is beneficial because it can help deal with the free radicals that are produced. So when we're going through an autophagy process and breaking things down, we're having chemical reactions. So there's going to be a little bit of oxidative stress. And we have mechanisms in our cells that can help deal with that. For example, when we exercise, we stimulate the production of glutathione. You may have heard of glutathione. It's the master antioxidant molecule in our cells. It helps us deal with oxidative stress. So exercise will create some oxidative stress, but that will trigger glutathione production that helps to decrease it. So when you exercise, even though you're causing a bit of oxidative stress, the amount of glutathione you're producing is more than enough to help deal with the exercise stress as well as other oxidative stress going on in your body. When we look at lysosomes, so these are the organelles with the digestive enzymes. When we have proteins or viruses that bind to receptors, so like the spike protein binding to a receptor on the cells, these will eventually be internalized into the cell. And that process is using what's called an endosome. It's just like a membrane bound. The membrane from the cell engulfs things and pulls it inside, kind of like phagocytosis. And then those lysosomes will contain acidic pH and enzymes to break down anything that is inside of those. So in order to have a healthy lysosome system, we need to make sure that we're not deficient in things like zinc, magnesium, vitamin A, and vitamin D. Those are very important for the functioning of the lysosomes. So other things that stimulate healthy lysosomes. By the way, I have a chart at the end that I will show you where we'll compare all of the different things that stimulate all of these processes, and you'll start to see that there are similarities with every single process and how we stimulate them. So again, we're going to see fasting, exercise, resveratrol, curcumin, which is a great anti-inflammatory, quercetin, this is the molecule in onions and capers that helps deal with mast cells, and histamine. Berberine can help your insulin response, decrease blood sugar. Spermidine again. EGCG, this is the green tea molecule. And then the minerals that I mentioned before, zinc and magnesium, plus vitamin A and D are all very important for healthy lysosomes. And red light can help the cells properly use all of their organelles. Now, when we look at the proteasome pathway, we have these molecules that will produce ubiquitin tags. So ubiquitin is just a kind of signaling molecule, and it can stick to things like foreign proteins, damaged proteins, or misfolded proteins. So we have this guy here in my cartoon who is labeling the messed up proteins with ubiquitin, but it's not labeling healthy proteins. So the healthy proteins stay intact and keep doing their normal functions, and then anything that is damaged or messed up will get labeled. Once the damaged proteins are labeled, then they will be broken down. So then we're going to use these proteasomes, these kind of coiled up molecules that I showed you in the cell picture, and all of the tagged proteins will combine with these proteasomes, and there are enzymes in here that will cleave them or cut them. And then we essentially chop up those tagged proteins that are damaged, foreign, or misfolded. And so our cells can do this all the time, and it does it all the time. So it can do this with spike proteins as well. And another thought that I had about why were so many people vaccinated and only a subpopulation are showing vaccine injury, how these normal natural cellular detoxification processes work determines how quickly the body can get rid of spike proteins. So there's some genetic factors as well that I'll talk about shortly, but different people have different amounts of effectiveness of their detoxification processes, whether it's in the liver or whether it's inside the cell using these processes. So the more we can help our cells break down these foreign proteins, then the sooner and easier we'll be able to clear them out and decrease the damage that's occurring in all of our cells. How do we stimulate our proteasomes? Fasting, exercise, cold and heat exposure, noticing any trends yet? Berberine, resveratrol, sulforaphanes, these are really high in broccoli sprouts. Curcumin, quercetin are zinc and magnesium molecules. They're amazing cofactors. Zinc is also especially important for the immune system. Our immune system is also involved in getting rid of foreign things. Vitamin D, and then NAD. So NAD is a molecule that our mitochondria use when we have NADH. So a hydrogen will bind to NAD plus molecules. NAD is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is a molecule that is actually made from B3, vitamin B3, which is niacin. And we need to have enough niacin converted into NAD so that we can make NADHs. Then we use these in the mitochondria to make our energy molecule, which is ATP. So this NAD plus molecule is also an indication of the amount of energy in the cell. When we have lots of NADH, we have lots of energy. As we use the ATP and the NADHs, this will create NAD plus. When we have lots of NAD plus, this indicates that we have low energy, just like fasting. And these things stimulate that AMPK molecule to trigger these cleaning processes. Apoptosis, this is the process where we get rid of an entire cell. So entire cells can be damaged because of DNA damage that can occur from all kinds of toxins. It can occur from infections, viruses, anything that is going to damage the cell, inflammation, toxic things, then this normal cell is going to start to look all messed up. And actually, I can show you what a messed up red blood cell looks like using live blood analysis. So using my microscopes, I can see some of this occurring by looking at the red blood cells in the bloodstream using a little finger prick. And so you can see in this image that red blood cells, when they start to become damaged, they start to look all bumpy. And so they're going through either an apoptosis process, which is a programmed cell death, or they're just being destroyed by the toxin. Also, sometimes red blood cells will look like this if they're just going through their natural aging process and dying. Red blood cells live for about 120 days, and we make new ones all the time. So once our cells go through this process, they'll start to look all bumpy, and then they will eventually break down into chunks. And again, just like the autophagy process, these can be broken down further into building blocks that we recycle and reuse, or it can be dealt with by the liver or the kidneys and we can excrete them. When we are looking at a process like apoptosis, we have to regulate it. We don't want too much because we don't want to get rid of healthy cells, and we don't want too little. So if we don't have enough apoptosis, then we can end up with things like cancer and chronic infections. If the cells aren't being destroyed and mutated cells are continuing to persist in the body, they can become cancerous. Infected cells won't be killed and they'll keep going. Or we can have persistent vaccine spike protein expression. So we need to be able to get rid of those cells, but we don't want too much. Too much apoptosis can cause breakdown of our tissues that we don't want to happen, like neurodegeneration or tissue wasting or autoimmune kinds of damage. So when we're looking at apoptosis, we don't want to just randomly stimulate this process. We want to regulate this process. How do we regulate apoptosis? Again, we see fasting. Molecules like quercetin that we've already talked about. Fisetin is another one. Curcumin, resveratrol, berberine, sulforaphanes. Okay, starting to see trends again. Green tea, melatonin. We normally make about 1 milligram of melatonin naturally in the evening and in the first part of the night when we're falling asleep. And this melatonin is very important for helping these kinds of processes be regulated. So if your sleep is disrupted and you can't fall asleep very well, then figuring that out is going to be really important. When we don't get enough sleep, our body sees that as a very significant stress. You will make cortisol and adrenaline and also not enough melatonin. So you can If you're sleeping properly, you're making all the melatonin that you need. If you're not, you can take melatonin as a supplement, but 1 to 3 milligrams would be the most that you would want to have, because that is going to more accurately mimic what's naturally happening in your body. Magnesium, omega-3 is really important. When we break down cells and when we're getting rid of entire cells, this is going to stimulate the need to develop new cells, to have cell division. Every time we make new cells, we need to make new cell membranes that are made of fat. Our nervous system, our neurons, our brain is full of this omega-3 fatty acid in the membranes. All of our cells need a certain amount of omega-3 to be able to make healthy cell membranes. NAC is another molecule, and acetylcysteine. This molecule is the precursor for glutathione. Again, glutathione is that molecule that's going to help us deal with oxidative stress. So when we're breaking down complete cells to get rid of damaged cells, there's going to be a lot of oxidative stress. When your body is healthy, you make enough glutathione to be able to deal with that. But when we're in an inflammatory situation, then our cells can use a little extra NAC to make sure that we can make glutathione. Astaxanthin is a great molecule. This is a really good antioxidant. It's the red colored pigment in things like shrimp and salmon. And often you can buy supplements of omega-3 like krill oil that also contain astaxanthin, and that would be a really good combination to have. And then again, we see our hydrogen water. Now, looking at our NRF pathway. So the NRF pathway is how we activate glutathione. It is the master transcription factor that tells our bodies to make antioxidant enzymes. And glutathione is one of the main ones, but we also have other ones. Superoxide dismutase is another really important antioxidant that helps our body deal with oxidative stress. Iron metabolism. We don't want to have too much iron. Iron is an oxidizing agent. You will increase your oxidative stress if you have too much iron. And then NRF also really enhances all of the mitochondrial effects that help us deal with oxidative stress. So in a normal situation, mild oxidative stress, like when we exercise or fast or have normal amounts of apoptosis, that is enough of a stimulant to produce lots of glutathione and superoxide dismutase to help deal with these free radicals. But in a damaged system, then we're not going to have enough ability to deal with oxidative stress. And then sometimes we have to help our body deal with this oxidative stuff. So glutathione is one of the main antioxidants that deal with free radicals. And we make that out of 3 amino acids: glutamate, cysteine, and glycine. So cysteine is the one that we would get from the NAC supplement. And these are really important. The glutathione molecule is really, really important. So now back to, I wanted to mention before, or I said before, how we have different genes that can contribute to who seems to be able to detoxify more than other people. And there is a gene variant called GST, which is the glutathione synthase molecule. So it's the gene involved in producing natural glutathione levels. When we have a mutation in this gene, we're going to have less glutathione production. So if you have a vaccine injury, it is highly likely that you have the variant that decreases your ability to make glutathione. So then NAC is going to be an important supplement, as well as extra vitamin C. Vitamin C helps your body to allow the glutathione that's there to be able to be recycled and used again and again and again. So when we have a deficiency in glutathione, this is connected with all kinds of things associated with oxidative stress, like aging, neurodegeneration, any kind of toxicity, chronic infections, autoimmune stuff. And if we have toxin overload, if your body can't keep up with the toxin level, I mean, the planet is fairly toxic, so it's hard for most people to be able to keep up with the toxin load. But if you have this genetic variant, then it's going to be even harder. So how do we stimulate this NRF pathway so that we can make sure that we're producing lots of glutathione? Fasting, exercise. The other thing that stimulates this is low oxygen. So some people do like altitude training. Some people will wear like a hypoxia mask to decrease the amount of oxygen. You can actually even simply stimulate this by holding your breath. So when you hold your breath for a period of time, then your oxygen levels in your blood are going to decrease, and that will stimulate this NRF antioxidant pathway. And you can do this whether you're fasting or not fasting. So you can periodically hold your breath all the time. It's going to be very beneficial. NAC is an important supplement for this. Sulforaphanes, curcumin, resveratrol, berberine, quercetin, green tea, and then ALA. This is alpha-linolenic acid, and this is an important fatty acid, very important for mitochondrial function that helps you deal with oxidative stress. People that have a lot of fatigue, chronic fatigue, or mitochondrial dysfunction would benefit from ALA. Vitamin D and E are also very important, and zinc. Now, when we look at DNA repair, how can we help ourselves repair DNA? So every time our DNA is mutated by toxins or foreign proteins, we don't want to just always go through apoptosis and kill those cells. We can, to a certain extent, repair the DNA damage so then that cell can become healthy again. And this is where sirtuins come in. Sirtuins are one of my favorite categories of molecules, and they are highly involved in basically detecting the energy state of the cell. And when the energy is low, like the NAD plus that I talked about, then it will stimulate DNA repair. So when we have certain amounts of stress responses, again, moderate stress or short little bits of stress, like exercising and holding your breath, some cold exposure, sitting in a sauna, those kinds of stressors can stimulate DNA repair. And then when we stimulate DNA repair and all of these sirtuins, we're also going to decrease inflammation. The immune system calms down when we're in these states. So low nutrients, right? If we have a little bit of inflammation, for example, when you exercise, you actually damage your muscle tissue, you create little bits of inflammation, but we don't want to have extreme, excessive chronic inflammation. Infections, certain acute infections like a common cold can stimulate this process, and then cellular damage. But again, these things have to be sort of natural, moderate amounts. If we have extreme amounts, these systems get overwhelmed and can't keep up with all of the processes. So when we stimulate sirtuins, this is going to also help activate autophagy, which is going to help our cells clean up organelles that are damaged, foreign proteins, weird proteins inside of our cells. So sirtuins contribute, as well as contribute to the cellular cleaning part, as well as DNA repair. And it also stimulates our antioxidant pathways. And when we don't have properly functioning sirtuins, then it creates this accelerated aging. So when we can have periods of time when we're fasting, oops, I shouldn't have gone to that slide yet. Periods of time when we're fasting and we're activating autophagy and lysosomes and peroxisomes and sirtuins and NRF pathway, that is going to help our cells get rid of things like toxic things and damaged stuff. And then when we eat again, it helps to stimulate repair and regeneration and growth of healthy new cells. So this is why it is so highly impacted in our aging process. So people that have sort of accelerated aging essentially have decreased functioning of all of these pathways that I've just talked about. So spike proteins aren't the only thing that can damage our cells and potentially our DNA. DNA damage can occur from the vaccines, from that DNA contamination that I talked about, where there's those plasmid molecules that may be integrating into some of the cell's genetic material. When new DNA integrates, it's going to disrupt the DNA that was already there. So that will create genetic mutations. But all kinds of toxins will do the same thing. So we want to always minimize as many toxins as we can. I mean, it's the planet's polluted, so we can't eliminate it completely, but we can minimize certain kinds of toxins. We can eat food that isn't sprayed with pesticides and herbicides. We can avoid plastic and, watch out for heavy metal exposure, things like preservatives. So basically, crappy food and unfiltered municipal water are probably two of the main ways that we get toxic things into our body. So clean, healthy plants and animals is going to be important to decrease the amount of toxins, as well as getting healthy nutrients like minerals and vitamins so that our cells have the energy and the resources to be able to go through these pathways and then regenerate. Foreign proteins like spike proteins, infections, oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, radiation like EMF, all of these things can damage our DNA. So we want to have a certain amount of time every day. Like I said before, sometimes we want to eat and grow and build and regenerate. And sometimes we want to fast and clean and get rid of toxins and damaged cells. So we need to have a balance. How do we stimulate sirtuins? You can see all of the same kinds of things that I have talked about for all of the other processes and pathways. There's a lot of similarities with all of these pathways. And then the other thing that's important for the sirtuin production is sleep, having a good circadian rhythm. Try to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time every day. Ultimately, if you aren't a shift worker, it's the most beneficial to sleep at night and be awake during the day. And so the more that you can kind of regulate your sleep and your circadian rhythm, that's just going to benefit all of these processes. Now, there's things that we can include in our diet that will, when present in our cells during these processes, will help promote these processes. And polyphenols are a really important category of molecules that we find in plant foods that can help us with all of these processes. So now, as much as I am a fan of carnivore for certain people, for certain situations, there are a certain amount of benefits that we get from some plant foods. So molecules like luteolin, sulforaphane, quercetin, resveratrol, EGCG, we can get some of these molecules in food, right? Curcumin, resveratrol, or quercetin. These things, in a perfect world, when we have healthy soil where food is grown and has a lot of these molecules naturally, we should naturally be able to get enough of these molecules from our food. Unfortunately, soils are depleted and foods don't have as many nutrients as they used to have. And I think this is a significant reason why we have this increasing epidemic of chronic disease. There's more toxins and food has less nutrients. So sometimes we need to supplement. Ideally, we would want to be able to get everything we can from natural places, but when we're in a situation where we have chronic inflammation, sometimes we need a little bit of extra help. So for carnivores, And again, I agree with carnivore for lots of different reasons, or low carb or keto, decreasing carbohydrates, and sugars especially, because we want to regulate insulin. We want to regulate our blood sugar. When insulin spikes and drops all the time from eating lots of sugary things, then that actually contributes to inflammation. So we want to be able to calm that down. But for people that are, doing a carnivore diet and you're not currently eating plants, things that you can usually safely add to a carnivore diet that won't affect things. Now, individuals may have certain food sensitivities. So again, be careful of, don't just do whatever I say willy-nilly. You have to think of your own situation specifically. But things like garlic, lemon, citrus peels, that's where you're going to get some cool molecules. Olives, parsley, like our herbs. These all have really good, healthy polyphenols and molecules in them. So having a herb garden, adding your own clean parsley and basil and oregano to different foods, it's going to be very healthy. Dark chocolate has some good polyphenols, green tea, peppermint tea, dandelion, the leaf and the root have different benefits. So I want to focus just a little bit more on the fasting aspect, because as you saw, every single process that helps our body clean things out, like toxins and foreign proteins and damaged cells, they can all be stimulated by fasting. So when we are in the fed state, this is our anabolic time period. So anabolic means we are growing new cells, we are making proteins, and we are storing extra nutrients. We store most of them as fat, but we store some carbohydrates as glycogen in our liver and muscles. When we eat foods that stimulate insulin, which is carbs, fat, and protein, all of our molecules. Carbs will stimulate the most insulin, protein next, and fats will stimulate insulin the least. Then we make this molecule called mTOR, which is really important for building, growing, and regenerating. This will inhibit autophagy, but we need to grow and repair and regenerate. So we need to have periods of time when we're eating healthy molecules, and then we need periods of time when we're fasting. Fasting is a catabolic process where we break down things like organelles and proteins. So when we're in a catabolic state, we're going to make the hormone that is kind of like the opposite of insulin, and that's called glucagon. The pancreas makes both of these hormones. When we make glucagon, that stimulates the liver and it stimulates this molecule called AMPK. This is our cleaning molecule. So we're going to break down, get rid of, take out the garbage, and stimulate this recycling of nutrients. And when we make mTOR, then this whole process is going to stop. So essentially, we want to balance when we eat and when we fast. So how long do we fast? What's the optimal amount of fasting so we can stimulate these processes without overdoing it and causing stress and cortisol and increasing inflammation? We want it to be regulated. Now, everybody is going to be different. And if you haven't done any fasting at all, no intermittent fasting, then you want to start very gradually and let your body adapt and get used to burning fat for energy when you're not eating. About 16 hours every day would be ideal. Then you're going to have 8 hours of an eating window. And then you're going to have 16 hours where the first, 8, 10, 12 hours, you're just going to be processing food and, storing nutrients. But the last, 4 hours of that fast are the most important ones. And that's where we're going to have some dusting and cleaning, kind of surface cleaning of the cells. And if we can do that every single day, then your body gets used to burning stored fat for energy and isn't so dependent on blood sugar. And then when you do this, you'll find that you'll increase your insulin sensitivity, you'll have less sugar cravings, and your body will start to get used to, okay, there's no food, we'll go to the fat cells. Your body, when your blood sugar goes down, its primary, sort of tactic to increase your blood sugar is to make you hungry or make you crave something, so you eat because that's easier for the body. When we break down stored fat, that actually requires an input of energy. So it takes a little bit of time for your body to adapt and get used to going into the fat cells and breaking down fat. And then we'll produce ketones, and our cells can use ketones to make energy. If you can fast about 24 hours once a week, 20 to 24 hours once a week, that would be excellent. And then the time between 36 and 72 hours of fasting is really the most optimal for really deep cleaning of your cells and promoting that autophagy process. So you could do anywhere from 36 to 48 once a month, maybe 72 every 2 to 3 months. Okay, so this is just approximate guidelines. Work with your own body and go by how you feel. So when we add in a little bit of exercise, you can exercise a little bit while fasting, especially if it's just your normal 16 hours every day. You can exercise totally normal even during your fasting period. Other than that, like just normal amounts of exercise, to stimulate these processes on its own, you want to aim for 20 to 30 minutes of kind of moderate cardio. And this can just be going for a bike ride or a walk. We want to do some resistance exercise. This can be with weights or just your body weight. There's lots of great videos on YouTube. You don't have to join a gym, but you want to work on making your muscles stronger. This is very beneficial for many, many, many reasons. And then mobility stuff. So working on, stretching, moving your joints around, using all of your range of motion. This is great because it also helps to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. This is the opposite to your fight or flight system that you have during stress. We need to have periods of time when we're relaxed, because this is when we're going to actually be able to heal and regenerate. Cold exposure and heat exposure, those kinds of stressors, you want to limit to, 1 to 3 minutes. If you're going to do cold plunges, you can walk outside in the winter when it's cold. You can just run your hands under really cold water. You can have part of your shower, just put it to colder temperature. So a little bit of that cold exposure also stimulates these processes. And then heat exposure, sitting in a sauna, maybe 20 to 30 minutes at a time, a few times a week. So that just gives you a bit of a guideline of the amount of time for those different kinds of stressors. Who should not do long fasts? So everybody can fast for at least 12 hours. Most people can probably fast for 14 hours. And again, remember, most of that time is while you're sleeping. So if you have your last meal at, say, 6 or 7 p.m., then you should be able to go until 9 or 10 in the morning before you have to start eating again. If you have certain situations, you're not going to want to push it much more than that. So people that have very low body weight and don't have a lot of stored fat to draw on for energy, people that are very ill, there's certain situations where fasting can be beneficial, but there's other situations where you just need to be able to get nutrients whenever you can. Pregnant people should eat whenever they want. Very, very high stress. So because fasting is a type of stress, if you are in a situation of chronic fatigue where your body is very stressed, then fasting is just going to be more stressful. And same with things like exercise can just be way too much extra stress for your body. So you have to listen to your body. If you have a very high toxin load, so what happens is a lot of toxins are stored in the fat. So when you fast and you start breaking down fat for energy, then you're going to actually release toxins into your bloodstream. So if you do this for too long, the toxin load coming out of the fat cells can increase too much and just cause more inflammation. So you want to be careful about how much fasting you're doing. If you don't know what your toxin load is, just feel how your body is feeling during a fast. If you feel a little bit hungry and you can kind of push through it, it usually comes in waves, then you're fine. If you start to feel very nauseous or very ill, or like your brain is severely affected, then stop your fast. People that have kidney disease are going to have a harder time dealing with all of those breakdown products that get released into the bloodstream. The kidneys are very important for, excreting those toxins. So people with kidney disease want to be very careful. Or if you have severe immunosuppression, because when we fast, we actually decrease the immune function even more. So when we have inflammation or autoimmune, we want to calm the immune system down. But if you're already immunosuppressed, then you don't want to do that any further. So it is very, very important to listen to your body and break a fast when you need to. When do we want to take supplements when we're fasting? We can take some supplements during a fast. So we can help increase AMPK or decrease mTOR with some of these supplements, spermidine, berberine, resveratrol, or quercetin. And you can do this during a 16-hour fast. So when you've been fasting for a while and you wake up in the morning and you have a few more hours to go, you can take these to sort of help get extra AMPK. So it's kind of like you can have a shorter fast with a little bit more cellular cleaning. But I would be careful with some of these, especially berberine, because it's going to lower your blood sugar and it'll make the fast harder. Like you're more likely to feel too much low blood sugar. So I would do those with caution. When you're fasting, if you're doing something like glutamine for gut healing on a regular basis, you could do the glutamine and the NAC about an hour before you break your fast. The glutamine technically breaks your fast, but so about an hour before you're going to eat, you can do the glutamine. Don't do it first thing in the morning because you'll break your fast too soon. And then during your eating window, when you are eating, you want to make sure you're getting clean food full of vitamins and minerals and polyphenols. People that might benefit from doing some supplements while fasting would be people that are overweight or insulin resistant. Then this is going to help that whole process, but again, it's not necessary. You can do very healthy fasting without taking supplements to boost the fasting. Sometimes people that have metabolic syndrome, so this would be high blood pressure, belly fat, and high blood sugar kind of combination, high LDLs, high, like sort of the bad blood cholesterol is LDLs. They're only technically bad if they're oxidized, which, when you have a lot of toxins in your body. Or if your fasting glucose or your A1C is high, then you may benefit from some of those supplements. People with autoimmune conditions can very greatly benefit from lots of fasting and keto or carnivore diet, because as soon as you have lots of insulin or you spike insulin, then that's going to increase the effects of autoimmune symptoms. And then if you want to do a shorter fast, but you want more benefit, so you want to eat at noon, so 8 a.m., take some supplements, muscle through a few hours. But again, I still just mostly highly recommend just natural water fasting in most situations. Okay. And again, I talked about these cautions in the previous slide. So now remember that recovering is important. You don't want to overdo fasting. You don't want to just fast all the time. We need to have periods of eating and regenerating tissues. And same with exercise. When you're exercising, you're actually breaking down your muscles. When you're not exercising, you're building your muscle tissue. You can't just exercise all the time because you will only break down muscles and there won't be enough time to rebuild them. When we are recovering, we want nutrient-dense foods. We want healthy fats, no refined processed seed oils like canola oil or vegetable oil. We want to have enough protein. Um, Plants, healthy plants, healthy carbs, but again, you don't want to necessarily overdo the carbohydrates. Fiber is really beneficial for our gut bacteria, our microbiome health. We want to minimize toxin exposure as much as possible. We want to make sure we're getting a really good sleep, and we want to relax and stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system. Even if your life is insanely stressful, you can trick your brain and just periodically, kind of like meditating, just imagine everything wonderful and beautiful and relaxing. Just put yourself in a little bubble for a period of time. Your brain doesn't know, that you're just faking it. We have mirror neurons so that when you imagine wonderful things, your brain doesn't know if that's real or imagined. So you may as well just create wonderful periods of time in your life to stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system. So when we are fasting, what kinds of things can you consume that will not break your fast? So water, clean water. Black coffee won't break your fast. Certain herbal teas, but not fruity teas and not licorice root, those will break your fast. You can have salt. You can put salt in water if you're feeling a little dizzy. Salt can help. Or minerals. If you do like a multi-mineral supplement, you can keep doing that during the fast. L-carnitine is a type of amino acid. It can help your body burn fat for fuel if your body is not used to burning fat, if you're sort of like carbohydrate adapted and fasting is difficult. Carnitine won't technically, although I would probably not recommend the carnitine during a fast. It is an amino acid and it may have an effect on fasting. So you could take carnitine during the rest of your normal day to help your body break down fat. Proteolytic enzymes won't break your fast. So if you're doing things like nattokinase, serrapeptase, or bromelain, you can keep doing those while you're fasting. And actually, you always need to take those supplements in a fasted state in the morning before you eat anything. And then if you're doing something like activated charcoal to help your body get rid of toxins, activated charcoal will pull toxins from the bloodstream into your gut and it'll bind to the charcoal and then you simply poop it out. So activated charcoal is, a good way to help your body detoxify. Things that do break a fast, things that you do not want to do first thing in the morning while you're fasting. Anything that stimulates insulin, so obviously eating any kind of food. Bone broth will break your fast. Collagen or glutamine supplements will break your fast. Any kind of fat, even though the insulin response is minimal, it is still a nutrient that will turn off autophagy. Protein powder, licorice root tea, any kind of smoothies, any kind of artificial sweeteners. So when you eat something with an artificial, or like say you put artificial sweetener in, I don't know, a glass of water. Don't do that. But if you did, the taste of sweet will stimulate your pancreas to make insulin. So you want to avoid those. So in conclusion, our body has the ability to heal itself. We can deal with all kinds of toxins and damaged cells and inflammation over time. Nothing is really going to work overnight, but if we, on a regular basis, focus on increasing all of these good beneficial things, getting sunlight, healthy food, clean water, getting sleep, exercise, and then some fasting to promote autophagy, and then decreasing the things that are making us sick, like excessive oxidative stress, toxins, bad habits, chronic stress, or chronic inflammation. As much as we can decrease those things that we can control and increase the good things, our body can come into a balance. And also, I want to just point out on the good side, we could add mood, like thinking of good things, our emotions can have a huge effect on our ability to heal and recover. And if we spend a lot of time feeling angry or fearful or guilty or, resentful, those kinds of emotions will actually decrease healing. And in complete conclusion, I want to say that anything that you can do consistently is going to give you longer lasting health benefits than doing a lot of good things only once in a while. So figure out the smallest amount of good things that you can do consistently every single day, even if it's a short fast, even if it's a short walk, a little bit of healthy food, a few supplements that are going to be beneficial for you. When you can do things on a regular basis for a long period of time, that will help your body very significantly.